You're watching the PBS NewsHour. I'm Hari Srinivasan, joined now by Simon Romero, who's going to update us on the situation in Brazil. We've seen some of these pictures. We've seen Dilma Rousseff come out and say that this is a coup, that this is a little bit more orchestrated. What are the implications when the sitting, or used to be, prime minister or president says that she's been displaced in a way that a lot of her supporters could say, this isn't legal, this isn't good?
Well, Hari, it sort of sets the stage for more turmoil in Brazil. Dilma Rousseff was incredibly defiant when she addressed the nation today inside the palace, and then she left the palace and walked across the street to address some of her most loyal supporters, and she delivered a rather stirring speech. She wasn't really known for being much of a public speaker before, during her presidency, but she was really expressing a lot of anger, a lot of resentment against the people who have just ousted her, including some of her erstwhile allies. And so this really sort of raises questions about what's to come now, because she's really digging in her heels for a long legal battle ahead.
How did this snowball? I mean, we've started to pay attention perhaps later in the game, but this started out as something different, and now it became a referendum on her.
Well, I think it essentially has largely to do with her management of the economy. Many of Brazil's booms right now, one of the reasons why the country is going through one of its worst economic crises in decades, these reasons are self-inflicted. The government spent a huge amount of money to prop up industries that weren't efficient, price controls in areas like energy, like gasoline and electricity. They've had to unwind those over the past year. That's contributed to the sharp recession that Brazil is feeling right now. So when things were going fine, a lot of the problems that were apparent to everyone here in Brasilia and around the country, involving even corruption, were largely accepted as part of the political game. But when the economy really took a nosedive, that's when things really started.
Two things. I see that you're pixelating a little bit. Are you on a hard line?
I am not, no.
Is there a way for you to get on a hard line? Probably not.
No,
that's fine.
Not, no.
Because I think there's a little bit of fluctuation with maybe other people. I don't know if you're in a hotel room or an office, but as more people climb on, it's. And then the other thing is, look at the camera, not necessarily at me, which is a little strange, but.
Gotcha.
And then,
okay, cool.
So, something that folks in the U.S. might not recognize is that when the VP takes over, it's not like in the United States, that they're not a member of the same party, not necessarily going to carry on what the president wanted to get done, right?
Transmission just went awry right there. I didn't quite hear the question. So.
No, I said that unlike in the U.S., when the VP takes over, they might not be from the same party. They might not be singing from the same hymnal.
That's right. Brazil's political system involves building coalitions. The president cannot govern alone without bringing other parties into their governing group. And that's what the Workers' Party, Dilma Rousseff's leftist organization, had to do over the last 13 years. And for the most part, they did that successfully, but it also emerged that they were buying off lawmakers in Congress. They were essentially bribing members of other parties to vote. They were seeking approval from both the House and the Senate. And so this proves to be quite an unstable system. It involves a lot of negotiations, a lot of manipulation. Dilma Rousseff wasn't really very well. It just wasn't.
Okay. So what do we know about the vice president? One of the things that pops up in headlines here is that the vice president didn't have much better approval ratings.
Michel Temer, the new vice president, he's 75 years old. He's a legal scholar and a lawyer and a career politician, and he has dismal approval ratings. He comes from a centrist party that was anchoring Dilma Rousseff's coalition. They took part in many of the decisions that she put forward as president. The most recent poll by one of the country's biggest polling companies put his approval ratings in the single digits, and only 2% of the respondents in that poll said that they would vote for him for president. So he's really starting with low expectations at this point.
And he's already started to make changes. He wants to start firing people in the cabinet.
Oh, he's already begun doing that. Yeah, he's been discussing cabinet appointments with potential nominees now for a couple of weeks. Some of those names have filtered into the media, of course. He's relying on top aides, some of whom are embroiled in their own corruption scandals, some of whom are under investigation in the huge graft scheme that was surrounding the national oil company Petrobras. So his administration is starting under a similar cloud of scrutiny as Dilma Rousseff's.
So what's likely to happen?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah, I was just what's likely to happen now if the president walks out, says that this is a coup, the vice president is out firing cabinet members. What do we see?
Well, it's going to be a fascinating turn of events. The last time Brazil went through this type of turmoil was 2.5 decades ago when Fernando Collor, another president, was ousted. He was accused of having taken part in an influence peddling scheme, and he opted to resign. He didn't dig in his heels and fight like Dilma is doing right now. So that sort of allowed a new government to form, allowed a new economic team to take power, and they ended up actually being quite successful in restructuring Brazil's economy and putting it on much sounder footing. Now, Temer is trying to pursue similar policies. He's appealing to economists who have a great deal of respect in the financial markets, but some of the policies that they might have to take are very unpopular. They involve a lot of austerity for big parts of Brazil's nation, and so there's still a lot of skepticism around what type of moves he might make now.
And what's the mood on the street? During parts of these protests, we almost saw it like a soccer game of protesters rooting for Team Dilma or not Team Dilma, right? But what's been on this? You reported. What was the mood last night? What is it like now this morning?
Incredibly polarized. I've reported from Brazil for 2 decades now, off and on, and I've never seen the country this divided. It's just, you have the president's, the former president's supporters, Dilma Rousseff's, who are vowing to support her and the leftist Workers' Party to the end. And then you have just a lot of things also over makes and economic policies. And millions of people have protested against her over the past year. You have legislators from opposing parties actually spitting on one another on the floor of Congress. You have examples of politicians being insulted and shouted down on airplanes and in restaurants when they enter into these public spaces. There's just a huge amount of anger. If anything, and this is really troubling, it reminds me a little bit of what Venezuela has been like in the past decade and a half. I covered and lived in Venezuela for 5 years, and incredibly eye-opening experience to see a country grow that divided, and that's Brazil right now too.
When you ask the average Brazilian, do they feel like this process is going to impact their lives personally?
That's a wonderful question. I think it really depends on who you ask, on their class background. There's a great deal of fury, of anger, in the upper middle class, and especially among the country's wealthier sectors about Rousseff. They feel like she's mismanaged the economy in a terrible way. They feel like her party is corrupt, and there are certainly signs of major graft and corruption within the Workers' Party. On the other hand, of humble working people in Brazil who have benefited from the Workers' Party's policies over the past 13 years. People who have gotten scholarships and gotten access to college, university through affirmative action policies, people who have traveled on airplanes for the first time in their lives. So they really did addressing the long-standing inequality in Brazil one of their priorities. And so still do have some support from parts of the population as a result of that.
Do people feel like even a change at the top will decrease the amount of corruption that's happening in Brazilian politics?
Not really, no, and especially not given the first signs coming out of Michel Temer's own government. You have several of his top advisors, some of his closest advisors, who are now under investigation for receiving huge amounts of bribery money. You have Mr. Temer himself. He was recently convicted of violating campaign finance limits and agreed to pay a fine. He could be challenged and could be made ineligible to run for office for the next 8 years. So you have this new leader in this very unusual situation in Brazil, where he is taking the helm of government, but he may at the same time be ineligible to actually run for office.
Simon Romero joining us from Brasilia. Thanks so much. Hold on a second. So we're just going to ask you this sort of question on how did it snowball. One of the guys who was watching just said that it started to cut off a little bit. So how did we get here? How did we snowball into a full-on an impeachment and a trial and a new president?
Well, I think it really largely has to do with the state of Brazil's economy. It was a booming economy back in the previous decade. It was an emerging powerhouse on the global stage. Brazil was considered to be doing very well, and a lot of the problems that were taking place in the political system involving graft were really kind of accepted as part of the political game as it was being played in Brasilia. But Brazil's own recession has become just so severe, and the wounds to the economy are thought to be self-inflicted by the policies that Dilma Rousseff was championing just a few years ago, that really her government just became unsustainable in that sense. There was a growing amount of anger, of fury about the way that she was managing the economy. And I think that really contributed to her downfall.
Okay, I think that's it.